Namaste and welcome to Bhoom of Bharat with Shiv Kumar, where each week we talk about GCC podcast and talk about what's happening in the area of GCC. I'm Shiv Kumar, the founder CEO of SRK Game Changers. SRK Game Changers is GCC consulting and service organization providing services across consulting, advisory, setup and governance process across talent, workplace solutions and business operations. We train our resources so that they can be created as more next generation leaders, pilots in terms of preparing innovative leaders of tomorrow. We provide workplace solutions which use technology as a core, and we deliver customized delivery centers using AI and digitalization as a core. And thank you so much for a very great response to our podcast. And today we have a very very important guest which is there with with us in the studio, and who doesn't need any introduction. You go to any of your NASCOM meetings or meetings in Pune and everybody knows him. So welcome, Kaushik. We have Kaushik Majumdar, an entrepreneur backed by 30 years of corporate experience, including executive management and board positions in very renowned companies spanning across BFSI, telecom, manufacturing, and IT. And he's also an executive partner with Wismatic. Wismatic is a company which is into research and helping, our India to become a GCC capital of the, world. So once again, Kaushik, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Kaushik, for the benefit of an audience, if I may request you to introduce yourself.
Well, you've already said a lot about me. Uh, well, I have been in the corporate world for 30 years, and the last 15 years out of that was with a GCC that I was part of setting up, and I finally was heading that. It was a Fortune 500 company based out of the US in the NBFC space. And we had centers in Pune, Hyderabad, and Manila. So that is what we used to look after. That's a little bit about my background. Today, I run an organization called KINSUGI, apart from the Wismatic that has already been talked about. Wismatic focuses on the data part of it and GCCs and the market research part, whereas KINSUGI focuses on more advisory and setup and maturity and evolution of GCCs. So we work on that space.
I have also seen you've been advising multiple global firms on their GCC strategies. For companies which are new to India opportunity, what are the top three strategic questions that they should ask before setting up a GCC?
As I see it, there are, if you're talking about three questions, I would say the three spaces that we can talk about are number one, structure. This should ideally cover how the GCC should report into the parent organization, what that structure looks like, what the governance model looks like, what the global operating models look like, etc. In case there are multiple GCCs for an enterprise, and who from the enterprise actually looks after the GCC. So the GCC leader has to report into somebody in the enterprise, who that person is. I think that would be number one. The second one I would talk about is location. This usually should start with the vision for the GCC, the drivers for the GCC. Once that is set, we can actually then identify, because today India allows a lot of a variety of locations with their own niche advantages or nuances, and therefore it is very important for us to understand the driver so that we can select the location very appropriately. The third thing I would talk about is culture, and this covers the cultural alignment between the enterprise and the GCC. This is a very, very important one. In fact, a critical one, I would say, when we are setting up a GCC. The nuances of this will actually have impact on the kind of talent we hire, the kind of leadership we hire, the teams that we develop, the policies in India, and all of those aspects. This is something that will help the enterprise identify the right leaders for the GCC and build the whole team from there. There are, of course, other aspects like the taxation and fund repatriation and other things which are typically asked. They are already being asked, and there are lots of answers that are available for those. So I'm not talking about those ones. I would like to focus on structure, location, and culture as the top three.
No, that's wonderful, because a lot of time we keep hearing, Is India culture different? Germany culture is different, or US culture is different. So that is wonderful that you're talking about. And today, we also see a lot of recent appointments of leaders like Deval Shah at Infosys, Kiran Cherukuri at HCL Tech to spearhead GCC practices. This is highlighting a significant strategic shift in the IT services landscape. Do you think this trend is accelerating now? What does it signal about the evolving role of GCCs in the global enterprise value chain?
In an interesting observation, yes, this is accelerating very clearly. I see it as a good sign, frankly. It shows the adapting to the GCC concept by the third party services organization. It's a major evolution, I would say. It's a very clear evolution from rejecting the GCC as a concept to acknowledging that as a GCCs, then accepting them and now adapting to them. So I see that as a great evolution over the last 25 to 30 years that has been going on. So I think it's a very, very good sign. I have spent 15 years of my career with the GCC and the other 15 years with third party services organizations. So I have an understanding of the two worlds. And I can tell you that the two models, I believe, have to exist parallelly. They have to coexist. And also, I would like to point out that the two are completely different worlds. Usually, this is something that is not understood as clearly, that these are very, very different worlds, and it is not the right approach to look at these two as competitors. I think co-opetition is probably the best approach in my mind.
I
There is a
really love
lot
that.
of
I said I love the part competition.
yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration between the two, and the two need to coexist. And the third party organizations look at the GCC from a third party perspective, but uh, that needs to change. While I understand how they look at it, it is very, very important to recognize that GCCs are not delivery centers, really, or not merely delivery centers. GCCs really are part of the parent organization, part of the enterprise team. They are not just service providers, they are absolutely integrated into the parent enterprise. They are value centers, and they have a much deeper stake in the enterprise's strategy. So they are not seen as delivery centers or service centers. And if that is a difference that is understood clearly by the third party organizations, then they will start reorienting themselves and figure out where the GCCs bring in a lot of value and where the third parties can bring in value. This can make a big difference if these two are understood very, very clearly. I think it's very important that this evolution actually happens. I think it's an absolutely movement in the right direction.
So, how do you think the smaller and emerging players should interpret this moment?
As far as the smaller players are concerned, this is an interesting thing that is happening, and over the last, I think, a couple of years, I am seeing this a lot more. The smaller organizations are coming in, and I think there is a lot that they can gain from. In fact, first of all, being smaller, they typically are more flexible and agile, and they also don't need to have as many complexities and as many change management issues that large organizations face while setting up a GCC. This gives them an edge, and they should actually take advantage of this edge. When I talk to smaller or mid-sized organizations, I would always talk to them about taking advantage of this benefit that they have. They can therefore shrink the timeline that GCC takes to mature and to move up in terms of value chain. There is a vision that should be there. They should very clearly understand what they expect of the GCC right from the beginning, and they should start off right away instead of just saying, "I will set up, let it stabilize, and then we'll go into the next mode and the next mode." We don't probably need to do that for a lot of mid-sized or small organizations. They can start very early on that vision. So if they can very clearly have that vision in their heads, they can staff right away with the end objective in mind and get going. I would think that is the right way to do it. So focus entirely on the quality and the impact, and not just the setup and other things. That's the right thing to do. And you should plan accordingly, staff accordingly, empower accordingly, and expect accordingly from the GCC. So that's how you should actually go ahead.
Okay. No, thank you so much for this. In fact, a related question would be that you also see mid-sized and first-time GCC companies coming to India. Do you think that their strategy and approach should be different than the larger organization which are already there?
Yeah, for the larger organizations, I think there is a lot more complexity in terms of the governance. Particularly, the structure and the governance can be complex. And it is very important to think that through for large organizations. In case of smaller organizations or those which are coming in for the first time, they don't need to worry about those complexities so much because they are smaller and more agile organizations. So they should focus directly on what their end expectation is from the GCC. What is the value that they're expecting, and start off on that note, not to bother about the overall change management and the complexities that big organizations have to think of.
And you know, once you're there in with our audience and talking to them, and if I don't ask you to share a real life example of how you've turned around a journey for a company, for a GCC, to make sure that we are able to achieve the unexpected value. So any examples if you could share, that would be really wonderful.
Okay, that's an interesting question. This is where the rubber hits the road. So I'll talk about one example that comes to my mind right away. This is an organization that had a very interesting situation. The GCC was set up, went well for a few years, and at the end of about 3 4 years, there was while it was doing well, and then it kind of stagnated. It was showing signs of stagnation, possibly early signs of stagnation. I wouldn't say it was stagnated. This was the time when they started a project to figure out what needs to be done to take this GCC to the next phase. And when that analysis was done, what was discovered is that the enterprise had a very verticalized structure. They had multiple businesses, and these were all different verticals, whereas the GCC was set up as a horizontal. And you immediately know that these two were causing roadblocks. And after a lot of stages, now this is a pretty old story, and therefore those days we didn't have a lot of GCCs to fall back on to understand what was going on. So I would think that it was one of those early GCCs that grew wise very quickly. And they actually managed to implement this change. They changed the GCC also to align with the parent organization structure, so it was verticalized. And the moment that was verticalized, we saw an immediate change in the entire organization, not just the GCC, but even the enterprise. First of all, I think the moment it was verticalized, the GCC also was verticalized, we saw far better ownership of the individual enterprise verticals on their respective aspects of the GCC. They did not see it as a service which was shared across multiple verticals. They took ownership of this. As a result, there was a lot better communication, a lot higher transparency, a lot more involvement of the GCC in those individual verticals. The moment that happened, it actually changed everything. And within about 18 months to 24 months, that was the time frame, all impact became absolutely visible. Metrics changed, impact changed, the quality of work changed, the kind of value they were expecting from the GCC changed, and the GCC itself changed in terms of what they were thinking of themselves. Their own identity changed. So I would say this is something that is a classic example of an enterprise that was willing to see how they could improve and were willing to make major changes, because this change in the GCC was not an isolated change. This change had an impact on the enterprise itself, because enterprise itself had a shared service, and there was a roundabout reporting structure. The entire reporting structure was changed, so a major impact was there even at the enterprise level. But they had the guts to take that action and implement this change. We saw tremendous change after this.
Yeah, no, I think the lot depends upon the kind of leadership style or the structured that you've been using, or decision making autonomy, which is very critical for the success of the GCCs. And yeah, you want to kind of share some light on this?
Yeah, so I can tell you this is going back to my earlier responses when I said who or what is the organizational structure. So this was one example of an organizational structure that you should think through right up front. But the other aspect of that project was that when we have a person who has to make such decisions, that the GCC structure has to change and it will impact the enterprise's structure as well. It is not easy if you are from the enterprise side, the person who is responsible for the GCC is not senior enough. This person has to be from the CXO group. They can't be a person who's at a VP level or an AVP level or a director level. Those do not work. So you have to have somebody who's senior enough, who's influential enough, and who has the right vision for the GCC. Only then such an implementation can actually happen. It is not easy for a new GCC, which is 2-3 years old, to just go and tell the enterprise change your structure, the enterprise structure. It's not going to be easy if they don't get that support. So that support was critical. The other side, on the GCC front as well, it requires a kind of leadership that can think of how to align with the parent enterprise organization and not think only in terms of SLAs. A lot of GCCs focus on delivery and SLAs, and that will never go to this level of thinking. So it is very, very important to therefore staff the GCC leadership as well as the enterprise leadership very well.
How do you've done so many GCCs, so any examples where you feel the structural alignment was very important, or how did you do that?
So the structural alignment, as I just talked about, is one of those. But there are other cases also I have noticed where a GCC is reporting into one particular division of an enterprise which has a lot of different divisions. And the GCC head does not even have a very clear understanding of the enterprise's priorities and strategies. They only understand one particular BU's or a business unit's strategy or their priorities. And whereas the GCC is not something that is meant to serve only one business unit, it is meant to serve the GCC, the overall enterprise. This can cause serious bottlenecks because the GCC leadership does not have the visibility. Therefore, they cannot create a strategy to move up in terms of their maturity. And they don't even have the reach to go right up to the top where such decisions can be made and influences can be passed on to the rest of the enterprise. So this is something that is going to be extremely important. To me, one of the most critical decisions that are taken when a GCC is formed is these two positions. One is the head of the GCC and the person that this head reports into from the enterprise. This team has to be absolutely the most critical team when we are deciding on a GCC. If this team works, they are aligned, they work in tango, they have the right chemistry, they have the right level of trust among themselves, empowerment amongst themselves, you cannot stop a GCC from evolving.
Shows the kind of relationship building, the customer focus which has to be there. And you talked about cooperation as well, so I think all of these things are very, very important for us to make sure that how we create that kind of a focus with our the customers. So, and you've been also very closely working with a lot of German and US companies. So, what advice would you be giving it to German or the US companies which are contemplating or evaluating that India versus other global locations for their, GCC center setup?
Yeah, I think we have already talked about a very clear vision that should be there. That is very important. A level of empowerment we have been talking about. So that is very, very important. I think I can highlight possibly a few blind spots that I notice, and that's something that should be avoided. The first, most important blind spot I see is it has worked this way in my country, and therefore it will work in India. This is possibly the first blind spot I notice. And this is something that you need to be extremely conscious about, and that is a blind spot. That does not always work. In fact, it does not work more often than not. Hmm. So it is very, very important to understand that piece, and therefore create a strategy and an approach where India specific nuances are understood and adapted, and the strategy is adapted accordingly. So that's number one. The second thing is probably what I just mentioned, the team between the enterprise leader who will handle the GCC and the GCC leader. This team has to be identified as the best, because one of the very important areas of a GCC and its evolution is change management. The GCC will come up with thoughts, ideas, and then a change management has to be done. Now, this change management is a very important part of any GCC's life cycle. Now, some of this change management can be done through skills and competencies, and the rest will happen from structure and governance. So it is important to look at those two aspects. So do we have the right level of skills and competencies amongst these two persons, this team that I'm talking about, the enterprise leader and the GCC leader? And does the organizational structure support it? So do they have the right kind of governance? Do they have the right kind of structure where they have the reach and they are able to influence the group that will have to make these changes impacted? The third one I would say is the involvement of the GCC, and I can put it in a different term as the seat at the decision making tables. Which are the seats the GCC has and the GCC leader has in the enterprise decision making tables? The higher the decision making tables where the GCC leader has a seat, the better the alignment, the clearer the vision, the clearer the priorities, and the more aligned the actions they will take. And this can actually create the best value that a GCC could actually bring finally in its life cycle. So the involvement, I would say, is absolutely ideal. It's very, very important. Number four, I can talk about are the metrics. It is very important for the enterprise to decide how they measure a GCC and its success. If the GCC is measured only in terms of output and SLAs, then you will get only a delivery center. If you measure a GCC in terms of its impact, you will get a value from the GCC, which is very different from the delivery. So it is very important to identify what that metrics are that you are measuring at the top level. I mean, it is not that delivery is not important. You cannot do delivery is actually hygiene. So you cannot do without delivery. But finally, when you're talking about the success of a GCC, somebody at a senior level cannot just look at delivery of a GCC or from a GCC. They will have to look at the impact of the GCC that they can bring. And the impact also has to gradually evolve from just bottom line impact to start to look at what are the top line impacts. And that's the evolution that they will have to look at.
The relating to this is going to be that when they're coming to India, they also going to be have a market for their own product on the services, which is, and the kind of talent which is available, the way we are training our talent, the government policies on education is awesome. I think some of these I've also seen that you're also closely working to see how AI and upskilling could be done and very closely associated with. So that's really very awesome. And the focus thing, you can't get anywhere in
Yeah.
the number or the
Yeah,
scale you're looking
absolutely.
at.
Absolutely. It is also important from time to time to understand that when you have an enterprise strategy, is your organization structure aligned with that strategy? So I see a lot of organizations, for example, that talk about higher collaboration required. We need innovation, and for innovation, you need collaboration between cross functions. And then we see an organizational structure which is so rigid and so verticalized that they are practically walls, and there is just no communication. If you actually can start breaking down walls, you will see far better collaboration automatically. So structure can actually guide that strategy of collaboration. Uh, this is something that probably needs to be thought through as well from time to time.
So thank you so much for this. And I was actually thinking about, having a kind of a rapid fire with you and that too on the Bollywood or Hollywood. But then decided not to have that. So I don't want to put
I'm
you
very
on
bad
the
at
spot.
Bollywood and
But
Hollywood,
suddenly,
the whole movie world. But if you have questions, I'm willing to take.
No, I'm going to have questions on the books because I got tempted with the kind of books which you have. So, what would be the book or the philosophy on global strategy your go-to?
Huh, interesting. There are lots of books, of course. If I have to choose one book for strategy, I'll possibly, the one that immediately comes to my mind is Art of War by Sun Tzu. That's an amazing book to go
Okay.
to. It's a really, 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 really inspiring book. I mean, you just go to it, and every single time you go to it, you have fresh insights into it. However, having said that, people who have worked with me will tell you this: that if I have to talk about where I go to, I go to nature. The amount of amazing strategy that can come out of what nature has to teach is just out of the world. It's beyond most human thinking. Nature has solutions to all kinds of things. And the kind of inspiration you can get from various things in nature, I mean, across, and it's not just one aspect. So I use the term nature as in a broad sense. You could actually build absolutely amazing strategies. So my go-to space actually is nature. But if you talk about a book, Art of War.
Which sport do you like the most? And are you? I mean, I'm sure football is going to be on your top of the list, but are you also following IPL?
I'm not following IPL, but yeah, I do. I mean, see on the news whenever it comes up. I'm not a big sports following person as such, but I do. I mean, whatever comes in the news, I do keep
Okay.
looking at it.
So the last question: in a GCC world, who's a real hero? Talent, tech, or trust?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Um, all three are critical, and therefore I think it becomes very critical, very important a question. I think if I have to choose an order, I'll start like this. I'll start with trust. Because in my mind, trust can get the best talent. Trust can attract the best talent. And talent can bring in the best technology for you. So if you start from trust, I think the cycle gets completed very easily.
Thank you so much, Kaushik, for such a engaging and rewarding conversation. Our audience is going to really enjoy and learn from it. In fact, I also learned a lot about the competition and different things which we could do to keep our talent and cultural in place when we are talking to the GCC. So once again, thank you so much
Thanks, everyone.
for joining us on this podcast. And for the audience, thank you so much for tuning into this special episode of Bhoom of Bharat. Don't forget to subscribe for more insights on the ideas and innovation shaping our world. If you have any thoughts or stories to share on this topic, we would love to hear from you. You could connect me on LinkedIn at SRK Game Changers or on our website www.srkgamechangers.com. Until next time, namaste from Bhoom of Bharat.